This is Mouth Media Network, the business of being heard.
Hi, I'm Julie Schott. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Starface. And what I love about beauty is the sense of community that it creates. So the way that people sort of congregate and support around specific practices. It could be something like the nail artist who you love, who you see once a month, who you recommend to a friend, whose work you support online, to the hairstylist, makeup artist, and then the products and practices that also bring people together. So I think I've personally found so much community through the beauty world, and that's what I love about it the most.
I'm Brian Bordainick. I'm a co-founder of Starface, and what I love about beauty is how individual it is and how unique and weird and different everybody's like routines and the way that they sort of put everything together is. It's just a really interesting and fascinating world to me.
From New York City, you're listening to Beauty is Your Business, covering the intersection of innovation and business in the beauty industry.
Welcome to Beauty is Your Business. I'm Karen Moon, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Abby Wallach.
Hi, great to see everybody.
And Julie and Brian, it's so nice to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
Let's just get into it. So, one of the things that I found super compelling about Starface is certainly the mission, and also just really took a fresh approach to branding and community in such a really crowded space. Would love to hear the origin story behind Starface and how you guys met.
Sure. So prior to Starface, I spent a number of years in the beauty industry as an editor. I got my start writing about the beauty industry, products, skincare, wellness, really backstage beauty, and watched the space really evolve over a specific sort of 10-year period, let's say, and saw so much change in people's attitudes. We saw inclusivity around body and all kinds of things, and just really didn't see a tremendous amount of change in the acne space, which to me was really striking because 95% of people experience acne at some point in their life. So here's this thing, and again, it goes back to connectivity that we can all sort of relate to. And yet there's only ever in my lifetime been one way to approach it. And that's sort of that acne is bad and we should attack it and fight it and make it disappear. And to us, that just felt really counterintuitive. I think, one of the best ways to kind of accept and own something that might make you feel uncomfortable is to call it out. And that's really what we did with introducing an acne patch that is front and center on your face. Yes, I'm breaking out, here it is, and I made it look cute and I feel good. Versus, when we came to the market, the goal was who could make the most invisible acne patch or who could make the strongest. We just never saw acne that way. It's something that can really impact your life. We know there's mental health implications of living with acne, and we think that a lot of that goes back to the way that the beauty industry presents it. So maybe if we grew up being told that this thing was normal and acceptable, it wouldn't be so difficult. And that was really just the impetus for doing things this way. And then to the point about how Brian and I met, I left my job as a beauty editor in 2018 with an idea and sort of a ton of trial and error and a really weird time in my life came after that. And I got super lucky because one of my closest friends introduced me to her then boyfriend, now husband, Brian. And he has a specific gift for bringing ideas to life, and he's not scared of a challenge because we met when, people didn't necessarily see the potential for an in-your-face, proud acne brand. And Brian really saw something. So
amazing. And I just, for the audience, since it's audio, I have to just kind of put some color on it. This is cute yellow, the big yellow packaging, a star patch, which is a golden star right on top of your face. So it's almost cute. It reminds me of, something you'd wear to a festival, like on purpose.
You know what I love about it? I think that with what's happening in our world of social media and how everything is, there's no barriers to entry anymore. Everyone's showing themselves being real. And what a great opportunity to make acne cool, right? Like everybody's had it in one way or another at some point in their lives or a little bit. So it's just, to put a fun twist on something and make it really acceptable because it's, affects everyone. I think it's, hats off to you for seeing an opportunity and making people feel comfortable with it, right? Because now everybody's talking about everything. It's really about the conversation. You have such a deep community. When did you start to really gain traction? When did you launch, actually? You said you started in 2018, Julie. That's pretty quick. It's only, 2021. Are we in 2021? Yeah. So you got it up and running. Take us a little bit on that journey of how you found Brian and then you went into R&D. Give us a little bit of the history of how you got this going and then started the brand and the momentum.
Yeah. Prior to meeting Brian, it was a lot of sort of like cold calling and meeting people, being told no, despite, having a lot of really strong relationships in the space. People just didn't want to make this thing. I think they didn't believe that anyone would ever wear decorative patches on their face, that anyone would ever want to celebrate their acne. So meeting Brian was really essential to sort of beginning R&D and development. And from there, we started to build a small team that I'll let Brian speak more to.
It was a really long journey for us, I think, in a lot of ways. So, for me, just to sort of back up for a second, what was so cool, I don't know I didn't at the time, I still don't know much, but at the time I really knew nothing about skincare, especially more broadly. So it was really, in a lot of ways, what's so cool, I think, about Julie and I's relationship is that she's a domain expert in the category. She's tested everything. She's seen everything. She's written about everything for a really long time. And I think what's been really cool about our relationship is I get to ask all like the really stupid questions, like, why is that the way that it is? Or like what everyone sort of assumes is the baseline zero. I'm always like, why are we starting from there? Like, what about like this sort of more generally? And I think when you look at the brand as a whole, what's been the most interesting part for me, when Julie was asking these questions, like, why can't acne feel more like streetwear? Why can't it feel like more fun like that? That for me, I was like, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm really interested in learning more about that. And when you look at our sector and our business more broadly, it's all predicated off of like a really simple ideology that's not wrong, and it made people lots of money, which is that, young people who are experiencing body changes for the first time, oftentimes are a little bit insecure about that. So if you play into that and position yourself as you have the solution to their problem and you can blast, eliminate, kill, heal, all of these words that the whole industry has predicated itself off of. And it's really been like that since the beginning, mostly because people haven't really said, like, why does it have to be that way? So the cool part is to come on a podcast and talk about that. The hard part is like all of the manufacturing, all of the supply chain is also predicated on that. So when we were going to people and saying, hey, we're kind of coming in with this like different take on it, we want to develop a character-driven brand that makes people feel good about their, like, everyone was like, but what about the white lab coat? And what about the magic ingredient, this or that? And we're like, no, we don't actually want to do that. It was a really big challenge. So finding manufacturers, finding people who can kind of help bring this to life, because neither Julia or I had made anything in this category before. We knew that we were missing a few pieces on the team that could help us sort of navigate that and maybe lend a little bit of credibility to it. So one of the earliest kind of hires that we made was our head of product, who came to us from like Honest Company. And that was a really interesting opportunity that really kind of blew the doors open on like places where we could actually make this, people who would take it a little bit more seriously. And from there, it was a lot of trial and error and constant iteration, but it's still like, it was interesting because so many people were looking at us before we launched, which we launched in September of 2019. It was just so funny because everyone just kept asking, like, why do you want to do this? Like, why would someone want to call attention to this? Or why would someone want to do that? And it's just been a really interesting journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, but it was a process, to say the least.
So, it's interesting as you say that. I mean, obviously, even to get a manufacturer to do something different, seems like they should be more open to it. How did you guys test the concept? Was there any early work to then convince investors? Because you guys have brought on a really strong base of like Brand Foundry, BBG, ABC, like really strong investors in this space that I know and have a lot of respect for. So clearly they saw something in you guys too.
It's really interesting, and actually, in a lot of ways, obviously, it's challenging and challenging for so many different reasons. But what's been really interesting about that process is that, especially early on, Julie and I were sort of running around talking about this, like, we're going to turn the primary packaging that the product comes in into a character, and the character is going to be like this character from outer space, which is really analogous to like the teenage experience, right? Like
Yeah.
experiencing everything on Earth for the first time. And what was really interesting about that was one of two things happened. There was nothing in the middle, right? You were either like, get out of our office, this makes no sense, and I want nothing to do with it, or you were really in, right? And there were a lot of people that we met that like right off the beginning were like, I get it. This sounds really interesting. But don't get me wrong, there were fewer of those people and more of the this is really stupid.
I think that's when you know you're onto something. I have to say, like when I get pitches and I'm like, this sounds like everything else, that's just how are you going to differentiate it to the consumer? But like, talk to us a little bit more about this outer space character, because that is so different than the traditional quote unquote playbook, right? So you guys rarely use human faces in social media and branding campaign. Like, what was the impetus behind this? Did you work with a branding agency? Like, how did you guys come up with it? And how is it working? You know, what are the lessons from this?
Yeah, I think some of it comes from having spent the number of years that I did in the beauty industry and writing these launch stories and getting to know these founders who we see who've built incredible millennial brands, for example. I love and like aspire to the aspirational aesthetic, but that's not me. Like, I'm not that together person with like a beige everything. It just didn't feel relatable. It felt very arm's length. And I think we wanted everyone to feel like welcome. These like cooler than you brands, it started to feel like just kind of bad. And we wanted to make something that felt inviting and comforting and cute and uplifting. There was sort of this incredible wave of really aesthetic, minimalist, chic, upscale, expensive brands marketed towards millennials. And they don't feel attainable to a lot of people. The price is prohibitive. The branding is a little sterile and distant. And we wanted to create something really welcoming and uplifting and joyful. And we couldn't have imagined the type of year that would be ahead of us when we created a world like this. But the idea was just to create something that makes you feel good when you look at it, when you use it. So like Big Yellow, the character just looking at you is adorable. Like, I don't think you ever get too old for things to be cute. And I think the nostalgia of childhood is something that stays with you for your whole life. So like the characters that meant something to you as a young person will probably always mean something to you. And then you might share them with your children if you have children. That's the type of universe that we're trying to create. Like, as you can see, like Sesame Street is still in my life. And so I think like never losing that childhood spark, it's so important to us.
I think there's another piece to that, and to like everything that Julie said, and putting a big and on it is like, one is the reality of the business as well. We weren't like an over-resourced company that could shoot multiple models and we couldn't do that. And one of the few strategic advantages that we had over the legacy players in the industry is like how fast we can move, right? So to have a universe that we can actually control and own, that we don't have to do big shoots and castings and things like that, we can actually sit down with our graphic team, come up with a cool idea. We can respond to stuff on the internet really, really fast in a way that other brands can't. I think is one really interesting kind of aspect to it, which is given the ability, like most people when they hear when we launch, they're like, whoa, I feel like you guys have been around for a while because we've like really kind of gotten in there really quickly, which I think is just like a really interesting way to do it. And part of that as well is that hopefully the brand has like this ageless quality to it in a way that like is exactly what Julie was saying, which when you use models, when you wrap the brand around a founder in a way that a lot of people do, and it's great, we kind of wanted to have something that people could grow up with and be around for a really long time. And it felt more appropriate to attach it to a character that doesn't get older and can sort of like live beyond, hopefully longer than Julie and I are relevant, at least certainly longer than I am.
I love that. I have to say, my background is media and entertainment for 25 years, and the man who created Big Bird was my mentor for 10 years. So I love that you have Big Bird sitting there. And I just did an interview and I was talking about him. So you're right. In regards to characters, people fall in love with them and they become a part of their world. And I love that you've done that in a way that is unique to this brand. It's really clever and it's super fun. I'd love to know a little bit more about how you started the marketing process and bringing it into the market. And like, what's your demo? Who are you going after specifically? Was it really young? Was it teens or tweens or, because acne, I mean, it really could be any age, right? I mean, specifically in the teen market, we know that. But how did you tackle that? And what was your initial go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I can speak to sort of the social media aspect, and then Brian might want to piggyback on that. But I think, things were very scrappy at the beginning. We launched the Instagram one day on a whim without a plan. I did that. Brian wasn't super happy about it. I just put it up because I don't know, that was the mood. And people sort of started getting excited and like putting emoji stars on their face and saying like, when is it coming? When is it coming? So we built a little accidental buzz there. In the lead up to the product actually being available, which was September 2019, we put together a content strategy that again was really just character driven, which seems crazy in retrospect. So if you scroll back to like our first week, you'll just see pictures of Big Yellow on a yellow background saying like, hi, I might like land on Earth tomorrow, versus saying like, hi, I'm a Gen Z acne brand and I offer X, Y, and Z. Again, seems crazy. Probably would have done it differently, but I think it got the attention of people on the internet because, we are so inundated with like beautiful imagery, incredible product shots. I'm always so impressed. Like, I have an account where I just look at beauty brands and I think like, God, you guys are shooting all the time. You must be spending thousands and thousands of dollars. Wow. It's impressive, but it's just not the route that we took. Yeah. And we just continued to sort of tell this story online through our character. And to your point that we talked about in the beginning, people were excited to wear it and share it with other people. I think there's something about putting this decorative and also healing patch on a pimple that immediately makes you feel better. You know that you're being taken care of, but you also like feel and look cute. And it makes people want to take a picture and talk about it. And it's just engaging in that way. So the conversation kind of really flowed online. And then, Brian identified TikTok as a space that we'd want to play really, really early. So we got there like shortly after launch when I think people in the US were still saying, oh, this is a trend, it's a fad. And we got to know creators there at the start of their careers, it's a really meaningful way to build a relationship. Got to know their parents, hosted, creator houses in LA. And that's a really organic place for us to have conversations too. It's obviously a lot freer and more reactive and a faster pace. But I'll let Brian speak to whatever I left out.
Yeah, no, and just kind of like adding some context to that, and it really is working, right? Because like I think you guys are on track to hit about 750 million, followers on TikTok, which for a brand part is like different. And I think what's really interesting here is we talked to so many beauty brands. We're like, how do you tackle skincare on social media? And I think to your earlier points, everyone's a little bit more aligned with. There's a certain playbook that everyone seems to follow, yet you have an audience on social media with millions of tags on people who like to pop pimples and things that are really ugly, but are like kind of obsessive and interesting. So it's like this fresh approach is actually really interesting where it opens the door for, I was just looking at one of your TikToks where she was like taking off the strip and you could see all the blackheads coming out. People are afraid to do that, but actually the consumer is there. So
they love it.
Kudos
they love
to you
it.
for
It's so
not
crazy.
being
I have a
afraid.
16-year-old.
Well, what's crazy is that the playbook broke, right?
Yeah,
So it's not like,
exactly.
Don't get me wrong. Like it would have been so much easier to use a playbook. So like part of the fun part I think about what we're doing is we're probably amongst the earlier crop of like Gen Z focused direct to consumer, or at least digitally native businesses, right? So it's fun because we were part of a small group and we're running really far. And usually we get like lopped into those conversations about like Gen Z companies doing really fun stuff. The tricky part about that and the reality of that is that there's not a playbook yet. So we can't look to like our millennial brethren and be like, okay, you did this, you used the sans serif font and you did this before and after, and then your site was optimized this way and you ran this type of ad and you did all these things. And then it just became like derivative and people kept plugging into the machine. The truth is like when we started the brand, we were looking at Instagram. It wasn't like we were oracles and we're like, TikTok is the next big thing. We literally watched that portion of the demographic like in droves just run away from Instagram. And you're like, well, if we're trying to market a product to this demographic and they're not here, like where the hell are they? And they happen to be on TikTok. So like I didn't care if like, and nor did Julie, like if the venture capitalists knew what TikTok was or they took it seriously. It was just like as simple as this is where our demo is, this is where we need to be talking to them. Like let's get on there and go. And I think one of the more interesting parts about the company has been we always sort of intuitively, like in our heart of hearts, knew and believed that the younger demographic was going to get it, and they did. The more interesting thing, at least from my perspective, has been this group of parents of young teenagers who had a negative experience with their skin and don't want the same for their kid. And that's been the more interesting. And as we've like expanded into Target and soon to be another retail partner, depending on when this airs in the UK, like it's been really interesting because in a lot of ways, there just hasn't been another option for people who had a negative experience with their skin to be like, I don't want to be told that there's something wrong with me. And I certainly don't want my kid to be told that there's something wrong with them. Like, what else is out there? Like, what else can I feel good about giving to my child, and also that like my pediatrician or dermatologist is also okay with? And there's just not a lot, as a result of that. So we've been able to kind of, I think, run a strategy by which we kind of meet young people where they are, and also empower parents of younger teenagers to be able to feel good about that transaction. And the sort of secret sauce on top of all of it is if you're a parent and you can give your kids something that they feel good about, like your kid's happy to get it and they're like, oh, wow, cool. Like that's game over. And that's something that we're certainly really focused on going into 2021.
What if you could tell your story? The story of your brand, your product, the compelling story of the sourcing of materials or ingredients, or even tips for getting the best use out of your products. What if you could engage your consumer, amplify their experience, or even improve conversion or initiate sales at points they don't usually happen? What if you could connect with your consumer wherever they happen to be, in the store, on your website, in the bathroom, or even on the go? What would that be worth to you? It's time you learned about StoryDot from Mouth Media Network. Short-form audio stories consumers can access with their smartphone, in brick-and-mortar locations, on physical product, or even embedded into your website. It's where commerce, advertising, and the consumer meet. Being competitive requires every advantage you can implement. So discover StoryDot today at www.storydot.com. That's www.storydot.com.
I'd love to hear more about Starface U. It's super interesting. Yes. Also, as we think about the creator economy and the whole ecosystem and technology being built around that. Yeah, I'd just love to hear more on the genesis of that and how that's going. And the other thing too is I think if you ask kids now or Gen Z what they want to be when they grow up, a lot of times it's like, I want to be an influencer. Talk to me about that.
Great question. Well, I in a lot of ways, I think that so many people who have stumbled into the creative economy feel as though they've stumbled into it, right? And they stumbled into it a little bit later in life. I think both Julie and I have always felt like a little bit out of place. Our brand as a result is a little bit like not cool kid in that way. And I think that's very much a byproduct of like how we feel. Starface U, I personally started my career in education. I was a Teach for America teacher, and a lot of my friends post-Katrina, New Orleans, just a really interesting and special time to be in education, to be in that part of the country. And when we were starting up this company, as I was keeping up with a couple of contacts, now a friend of mine runs an organization down in New Orleans called 4.0 Schools. They do like philanthropic investing and work with teachers on like, developing strategies and new school models. It's like a very cool organization. And he pushed me and said, how can you use this organization to do something really different and really awesome in the educational space that sort of flips an ideology on its head? And that was that, young people, if you think about the model of an internship, it's built on the idea that you as a young person need to learn about how we do things here. And we're going to sort of like, the relationship is us giving to you and you sort of serving in this like very menial sort of task role, and you get like an experience. We kind of wanted to approach things from a perspective of saying, what would it mean to sort of design programming where we value young people for where they are and think that they can actually produce work that's worth compensating for right now? What would that look like? So we tried it once, didn't work. We tried it again. And then when it did work, which is this most recent iteration, we actually hired the young people from the earlier versions of the program to design the new version of the program. So we had 4 or 5 high school juniors and seniors who designed what the programming should look like, which is, of course, when the old people get out of the way is usually when it works. And what they did was they designed a semester-long program where they are 1099 employees of the company. We compensate them for the work that they do. They have schedules. They produce all the TikTok content that you see that has the hashtag StarfaceU with it. And then they brought in their own speakers. Like, we helped facilitate it, but they were like, we want to hear from these people about how to get into the creative economy. And we thought, when we were doing the earlier versions of the program, that we should bring on people who are like there, right? They've made it. And that's not who the young people wanted to hear from. They wanted to hear from people who are on that journey. What does it feel like to have to go to school and produce content for a brand? Like, all of those types of sort of conversations. And the most interesting part to me was, my friends who are in their 30s and 40s who are getting into the creative economy for the first time, who have to deal with issues of IP, who have to deal with signing creative contracts for the first time. It's very much something that like actors have to deal with, and so on and so forth. And it blew my mind that 15 and 16-year-olds were going through this process for the first time, setting an invoice to someone for the first time, like having to meet a creative deadline for the first time, like how does my IP get treated for the first time? And they're doing that at 16 years old. It's been an incredible experience for us as a brand. I think even more so as human beings, like just to be a part of it. And the sentiment that the young people are pulling away from it, like I think the one quote that stands out to me when we were going through at the conclusion of this most recent semester was that like young people are going through and saying, hey, the thing that I got bullied for is the thing that makes me special. And I learned that through this type of program. I was like, that's it. That's it. That's like exactly what we wanted to do. And it's something that I hope other brands will follow our lead. And we're trying to build the infrastructure so that they can be a part of it. It's something that we want to take to other startup companies, other beauty companies. It's certainly by no means meant to be proprietary, but it's really an incredible program predicated off the idea that like young people have value now. And
They do.
Like, it's really awesome. I don't know what else I could say about it. I'm sure Julie has other thoughts on it as well.
It's really interesting, the fact that you merge the value of a brand in beauty with real entertainment and pulling in, these young voices, because it's funny when you look at the younger generation, they're really so much more sophisticated than you could ever even imagine because of the way they've grown up, right? So it's interesting to see. I'm curious to know, what do you think the future is? Like, I totally see where you're at. I have something cool that's sort of headed in the same direction. So I'm wondering, how are you seeing this evolve with these young influencers, so to speak, and where it's going to go with them? Do you envision them being part of the brand as you evolve, or do you see them being in the retail space? Because right now you're just on the internet, right? Are you distributed outside of your website? Oh, where else are you? Yeah, tell us a little bit about your distribution and what does that even look like?
Yeah, so we just launched into almost every Target store in the United States. We did that in October, so about 13 months after we launched the brand for the first time, which is both very cool and extremely challenging. And I'm assuming this won't air tomorrow, so by the time this does air, we'll be in the vast majority of Superdrug doors in the UK. So retail has definitely been a part, or is now a part of our strategy for sure. I think as we think about young people more broadly, the way that we've sort of constructed Starface U specifically is to be sort of evergreen in that nature. So we have right now currently still on staff with us, we still have 5 of the 15 participants of the fall semester that are now working with our advisor on redesigning the program that will take place this summer. So, and then they all sit in a DM channel together. They sit in Slack with us. It's definitely something that we will continue to do as a business. It's, I don't know, if nothing else, it's just awesome. So we really like it. They're refreshing. even after a long, grueling day, to be able to jump on these calls with them, it's super refreshing. And I think it prevents us from making a lot of really bad decisions, having this type of like intimate access to young people in that way, where we're like, Julie will ask them questions all the time, like, who's your favorite character growing up? Or, hey, we're thinking about this. It's just like helpful to have that gut check. And if I may use so much language, it's like one of the interesting parts about COVID is that they're not all located in New York or LA. They're all over the country,
Right.
And we're able to connect with them in a meaningful way via Zoom. And it's this very special, I think, unique thing that we will continue to do, at least as long as we're around.
And I think just the last thing I'll say about it, because Brian spoke really well about it, is that at a time like this, it can be near impossible for a young person to have the type of job that you would have as a high school student. So the retail opportunities, the hospitality opportunities, those aren't there right now for these kids. So you can't necessarily go out of the home and make some extra cash. And it's very cool to get paid for something like this at a young age.
It's also such a great diversion, right, for all of these, because everybody is home and it's everything has changed. So for them, I'm sure it's so exciting that they're able to work with you and learn from you, right? It goes two ways. So you're sharing, they're just being themselves, right? But it's teaching them and it's educating them for their future. But how cool is that? Like if I was young, I would have loved, at that age to have people to learn from. So it's a great synergy. It's a really amazing way of thinking about building a business and a brand in today's generation, and even including the parents. I know exactly it's great. I love what you're doing. It's very exciting. So hats off to you. I think you can also really add a lot of value to them for their future. It's not just about the brand and making the money. Of course, that's very important, but you're giving them something that they wouldn't have access to, which is really valuable for kids today as they're figuring out what they want to do in the future. It's great.
Totally.
So what's next? So where are you headed after, now that you're in Target, which is amazing? That's a whole other business model. Big expense. How do you think you'll incorporate the community into the retail platform? Is that something you're thinking about addressing?
I think, the truth is like we're still figuring it out. I think this gets to the earlier question about Playbook, right? So the cool part is to say like we're one of these like early Gen Z brands. The challenging part is that there isn't a playbook, right? And in a lot of ways, I think 2-3 years from now, if we're successful in this like crazy strategy that we're taking, I think brands will point to us and say, that's what we got to do. We got to do it like that. So, we've candidly really over-indexed and erred on the side of like surrounding ourselves with really smart people and asking lots of questions. And that includes young people, that includes investors, because I would be very leery of anyone who said that they know exactly what they're doing right now, like what the right omni-channel mix is, like how to bring it to life. Like we're very much trying our best to take really smart, informed decisions, learn really quickly, and not be afraid to kind of throw everything out and start over. So it's hard, right? Because in a lot of ways, I think we want to make sure we have our stuff together and we really come across as like intelligent, but you're really taking smart bets and trying to learn really fast from them. So even when we were going into Target, for example, it wasn't like we were like, oh my goodness, our direct to consumer business is slowing down. How do we sort of make up the revenue? We were like, this seems like a really interesting additive way to get to the rest of the country in a sort of like cash positive way, and also meet people where they are, right? It may not be where you would have initially expected us to be, but it was like the perfect partner for us for a multitude of reasons. And then we've been learning from that and saying, okay, we saw that experience worked really well. We're like, how do we take that to another market that we're in? So we approached Superdrug and we're like, hey, look, we're working with Target in the US. Here's some of the data that we're pulling out of there. Here's what we're seeing on the ground. And we're really able to leverage that experience with another retailer. And I think that type of now that we have both of them soon to be up and running, we're just trying to like kind of like monitor, see what it looks like, see what it feels like. But there's a lot of room for us to grow within the channels that we are. I don't necessarily think that we need to run to expand all over the rest of Europe or run into other markets, even though it would be nice to have the additive revenue. There's a lot of room to grow within the retailers that we're in, a lot of room to grow from a direct to consumer perspective. And I think we've laid a really interesting foundation in 2020, our first full year of operation. And where that goes in 2021 is like, how do we continue now that everyone's like, oh, of course, having a character driven acne brand makes sense, right? Like, how do we continue to kind of push forward in a way that makes people nervous like it did when we launched, and continue to sort of reinforce some of the things I think that we did well, but it's early days of like sort of development, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious in terms of like your timeline and getting product to market. So from, the website to your digital, is it the same product that will be online that's in store? How big did you go out of the gate to open in Target? Because that's a big, operation. And you're small, you're a startup. So like what approach did you take? It's for our audience, it's always great for us to give deeper insights, because especially with startups, sharing what people are doing to help them in the future, right? So we all want to have success. We all want to help people so they can follow different roadmaps. And like you said, the roadmaps, there is none in this day and age, but there is an old roadmap to launching at retail. Like, how are you thinking about that in terms of like your SKUs and building that out as a small company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So because we were really fortunate that the direct to consumer side of our business was starting to hit its stride and seeing month over month strong growth, Julie and I elected to sort of not do what was typically expected of a small brand, right? We didn't necessarily want to go in the direction of picking up a 10 store retailer and building up our muscles and then doing a 50 store retailer and then eventually having this really wide spread. We sort of took the approach that, hey, this is kind of working for us right now on a direct to consumer basis. If we're going to go into retail, let's find a retailer that can actually give us really serious additive opportunity. And that means like almost pushing out to the entire footprint. So, and as a result of that, when we went to, sit down with a retailer like Target, we were just really transparent. Maybe that's because we're bad negotiators, but we were just like, look, what's important to us is scale. So if we're going to do something, we want it to be in like the vast majority, if not every single door. And we know that what's important to you is exclusivity, right? So what does it feel like for you guys to put a shoulder into the brand? And what would you guys need in exchange for that? And that's what we did, right? So we sort of were like, what does it mean to be a good partner? Here's what's important to us. And then we were able to sit down with them and really map something out that made sense. So, we were able to secure things that maybe wouldn't have been on the table initially for a brand because we were willing to give them a year exclusivity. It was worth it to us because we're like, this is great. We're going to learn a lot from this relationship. Let's give it the best chance at success that we possibly can, because there will always be other retail footprints or other things that you can do. We wanted to really make sure that this one worked in particular. And they've been a great partner in that way. Some of the challenges that we have seen at retail, they're good problems, but they're real problems, especially during COVID. So we outperformed the initial expectations at Target by multitudes of pretty seriously. So it's cool and it's fun to say on a podcast that like, yes, we outperformed what we were expecting. The reality of that on the back end is quite challenging. We're a small brand. We didn't have 1 million units of something sitting around. So to be able to chase into that inventory, you multiply that by 1,700 stores, it becomes really daunting really fast. And then trying to move things through a global supply chain is challenging, right? So the opportunity is there. And when things don't go exactly as you're sort of expecting, either positively or negatively, it can be really challenging. And I will say that they've been a really good partner in helping us kind of like work through that. We've been fortunate that the issues that we've had with them have been due to overperformance, but they're still really challenging, I think, to work through for sure.
Well, good problems to have. Congratulations, you guys.
Thanks.
So up next, we're going to hit the pan and get to know Julie and Brian on a more personal level.
Culture starts at the top, and great customer experience, the only competitive strategy in today's world, is fueled by great leadership. We hear and read this every day, but many brands don't drive customer-first strategy. For those at the top who want to make that leap but don't know how, we'll learn from leaders who share what you must do to become customer-centric. I am Liliana Petrova, and this is The One Thing.
The One Thing, Customer Experience from the Top, is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever the best podcasts are found.
And now, it's the pan.
So this is one of my favorite parts of the show, where we get to know both of you guys on a more personal level. So first I'm going to take a spin at the salon chair to see who gets to ask the first question, and it lands on Abby.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Julie. So your background was in beauty and you had this big idea, and it sounds like it's fantastic and really taking off. But I want to know a little bit more about you when you were little, because you have Big Bird and Elmo sitting behind you. So were those your favorite characters? And when you were dreaming up this idea for Starface, like what was your initial, who were you thinking about? What characters was it bringing you back to from your early childhood?
Yeah,
moments?
I love that question. I grew up overseas and moved to the US when I was around 15 years old. And I had a really terrible time as a teenager. And I think that's why I'm hyper focused on that time in a person's life, hoping to contribute to making it different for young people today. I think it's just probably something that'll always be important to me. And I grew up like any kid watching so much TV, obsessed with MTV, The Simpsons, South Park, Sesame Street. So there's the full spectrum of subject matter, and just so much TV, so much music. I think pop culture has always influenced and inspired me. And to me, there's these anomaly characters and universes that defy age or demographic. That to me is always the goal, is to make something that can be relatable to as many people as possible. So young people and their parents. And that is something maybe The Simpsons.
I love that. So, the other thing that I'm thinking about is this whole idea of social. So Brian, my question for you, I didn't get enough about your background, so I don't know where you've been, what you've done, but, as partners, you both seem to have really great insights with different knowledge. When Julie came to you with this big idea, what were you thinking? What did you see in your mind? Because, this was a creative vision for her, right? That she wanted, and that spoke to her as a child and when she was younger and was addressing it. What was exciting to you about this idea? And in terms of character development, so girls and guys think differently about characters, right? Girls think about girly, things, and guys tend to think about Star Wars and all that. So where were you headed on that front? I'm sorry, I know it's not a specific question, but when she initially told you the idea, because it's all about outer space and that whole thing, how did it all for you? What was your immediate reaction and what were you envisioning?
Yeah, I think for me at that point in my life, I was very much in an exploratory mode, right? And I don't consider myself a domain expert in anything, and always really value people who bring that perspective to the table. So, when Julie was sort of asking questions about what would it feel like to, in essence, reorganize a category or build it up differently. I'm a history dork, I'm a history major. I love that stuff, much to the detriment of my wife. But I really started to look at how did we get here? Right? What led to why things are the way they are on shelf? Why did the industry choose to organize itself this way? And how did it come about? So for me, it was very much a yarn that I started to pull on, that with her sort of questions kind of playing in the back of my head. And then when we got to the very beginning of it, it was oh, it's because if you can make young people feel a little bit more insecure about their bodies, you probably make a lot of money. That was the crazy part for me. I was that for me personally, I don't care if everyone is running one way. I get a little bit of a rise out of running the exact opposite way. So I think what was really cool about our relationship was that as I started to really process what she was saying, the insight there, the most interesting insight there was that this category is organized not for a good reason. It's just because it worked and people didn't really think to sort of change it. So that was the most interesting part of it, and how we brought that to life and how that was going to look in the market. All of that is honestly, it's secondary from really this initial sort of I think I hate to use the word disruptive, but truly a different way of looking at the category, which is what would it feel like to build an acne brand that was fun, positive, optimistic, self-expressive, that just candidly didn't make young people feel like crap. To me, that was the most interesting part, and I think still is the most interesting part of what we're doing.
So we're going to take another spin at the salon chair, and it lands on me. So I'm just blown away by the Star U incubator for students and what that means, and just like the fresh approach to social media and positivity. As you guys have been doing this and connecting with young people, just curious to know, what's your positivity routine and how do you stay positive in such a crazy time?
I actually love this question. So there's a couple of things, and I'll answer as quickly as I can, because I could talk about this for like 3 hours. But I was a startup founder. Business didn't work out, and I had to take a quote unquote normal job, and then I got to do this. So I think for me, even on the absolute worst days, there's a really healthy dose of reminding that like we get to do this every day. And I try to personally maintain that, especially as I deal with our team and other people. It's just like, this is just really cool to get to do every day. And it also, like, even on the worst day, it still is not what I was doing before, which really was not fun, right? So this is, in so many ways, I think that we're lucky, we're privileged, and we just get to bring something to life that makes people happy every day. And yes, the days are long, sometimes they're crappy, but that's just a really cool way to live your life and roll out of bed every morning and get to do. And I would say that, and doing yoga every morning at 7 a.m. is a way that I try to stay positive and keep a generally good outlook on things.
I agree with Brian. I can't believe this is my job. I feel really, really, really lucky, especially during this time, to be employed. Really grateful for the support of people who've kept our business afloat during this just such an incredibly challenging time, and seeing people in adjacent industries who've just been impacted in really profound ways. But with that said, sometimes gratitude is not enough, especially given like the circumstances that we're all facing this year. I have been, trying to keep a healthy balance of plugged in and unplugged, and like participate in a number of like online support groups and things like that, communities outside of my community, outside of my friend groups, outside of this work, where like women can just connect and like share. And that's been new for me during, I guess it's about a year.
Amazing.
For those that do want to kind of follow our journey or get in touch, like, it's a great opportunity to follow us on Instagram. You can shoot a note to us at hello@. We're not big enough where those emails don't go into our own inbox. so it's a great way to get in touch.
Julie and Brian, first, congrats on all the successes, for doing something different and, having it be so successful, so far. We're so excited to follow you on this journey, and really excited to see what you guys do next, because I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. And so thank you so much for spending time with us on Beauty is Your Business.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And thanks to Abby for joining me on this journey and learning about this brand.
So much fun. Great to be here.
This is Karen Moon with Beauty is Your Business, and thank you for joining us for this special episode, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Hugs and kisses.
This has been Beauty is Your Business. Produced by Mouth Media Network. Copyright 2021. Keep in touch on Instagram and Facebook at Mouth Media Network. And find prior episodes at beautyisyourbusiness.com and wherever the best podcasts are found. Your brand message can be on this show. Email us to find out more at podcast@mouthmedianetwork.com. Thank you for listening.